My name is Arshak Ben-Lian, and in today's conversation at the One in the Many, my guest is Robert Begley, founder of Speaking with Purpose LLC, and author of the Amazon best-selling book Voices of Reason: Lessons for Liberty and Leaders, which will be primarily the topic of our discussion today. Robert is a communication strategist, keynote speaker, and speaking coach who helps leaders integrate moral clarity, persuasive communication, and purposeful storytelling into their lives and work. Drawing from philosophy, rhetoric, psychology, and leadership, his work explores how individuals can connect ideas, values, and action to speak with greater courage, conviction, and impact. Robert, welcome to the One in the Many.
Thank you, Arshak. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been listening to your show. I think what you're doing is so important. You take time to unpack really important ideas in the culture today. So I'm really honored to be here with you.
Thank you. So am I. I'm honored to have you. Now, we should make a full disclosure to my audience. Robert and I have been friends for, I don't know, almost 3 decades, something like that.
Yeah, in the 1990s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Last century we met.
yeah. Um, so, Robert is born and raised New Yorker, but he prefers the warm weather, so he's no longer in New York, where I have a sweater on me in May, and he's, of course, in his warm weather attire. But we decided to get together on the One in the Many podcast because you last year you published your book called Voices of Reason, and I find it very valuable in the sense that it teaches a person how to develop and how to find and develop his voice, and how
Yes.
to project that voice with conviction, as you put it in your introduction, with impact. And um, it's a truly a manual, and so on the practical side is invaluable. But I also found it very interesting and valuable in the way you constructed it, in the way you refer back to the philosopher Aristotle and drew from him, and found 7 remarkable um, individuals throughout history that definitely made an impression on everyone alive that knows a little bit of history. And my first reaction to the book was, this is a manifestation of the principle of the moral is the practical, and the practical is the moral that Ayn Rand professed. So thank you for letting me read it, and thank you for writing it. And so my first question is, how did this project come about? When did you start thinking about it? How did you develop it? What
Yes.
motivated you? And pretty much the genesis of the project.
Before I get to that, Arshak, first I want to thank you, because what you said, you texted me about this book being the moral and the practical, and that blend of the two, which has been a major aspect of my life, certainly inspired by Ayn Rand, but not limited to her, because I think Aristotle's philosophy upholds the same thing. And of all the feedback I got from dozens of people who know me, don't know me, you are the one only person, you are the one out of the many who said that term, and you bullseyed one of my primary goals there. So we'll talk more about the moral and the practical as we go along, but I wanted to just acknowledge your insight. That was very rewarding for me. Well, since the 1980s, I've been threatening to write a book, some kind of book, thought it would be about New York City. I've always had these different types of topics, book projects, but it wasn't only until about 3 or 4 years ago I said, that's it. I really need to buckle down and complete something. And in 2024, July 2024, I was invited to speak in Nairobi, Kenya. And the goal was to share some insight from famous speakers and how they can help today's future leaders in understanding the principles of effective, memorable communication. And then once after that presentation, July of 2024, I did buckle down. I worked constantly, at least 5 days a week, writing 90 minutes to 3 hours. Carrie Ann would see me get up at 4 in the morning. I know that's when you get up normally, but I was so excited, Arshak, to write this book. And she gave me, Carrie Ann, I think, is the best editor on the planet. So I'm very fortunate. This book would not exist without her amazing editing. So at first it was about 30, 40 pages. And then she comes back, no, it's just higher level stuff. Dig deeper. Then I go back and I give her, and then it's about 80, 90 pages. And then, yeah, a little bit better, blah, 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 do this. And then finally, the final version, I had a publisher, Indie Books International, who is in the lane that I wanted to be in, which is for business people. The one thing you haven't said is I look at this, it is like a workbook. My primary audience are those in business because I think they have products and services that help our lives, but they don't always communicate it effectively. Now, this can be said of any discipline, but in my particular interest, especially because I'm so pro business and I feel like they don't speak out the way they could or should. So, with that in mind, the publisher, Indie Books International, that is their lane of professional speakers, which I am. And so it just came together I started in earnest July 2024. And then by probably March 2025, I was ready with all the editing. We wanted a special date. As I was going back and forth with their editing, they said, well, nonfiction books don't really come out over the summer. So we tend to target Labor Day. And I looked at the calendar. I said, wait a minute. And they come out on Tuesdays. I said, wait, the day after Labor Day is September 2nd. This date is significantly important to me. And so I want my book to come out September 2nd. Why are you laughing, Arshak? Fill in the audience.
I was going to ask, well, what's the significance of September 2nd? But
well, that's when Ayn Rand started Atlas Shrugged. That's when her magnum opus opens. And over the course of 4 years of the novel, something pivotal happens on September 2nd. So I wanted that date for my book to come out.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful beginning of a great project. And I think the fact that Carrie Ann, who is the love of your life, contributed in such an extent, and the project became all the more significant and integrated.
Yes.
And we should tell our audience that Carrie Ann is an Aristotelian scholar. She's a professional philosopher, so it's good to have an editor like this when you draw on Aristotle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I could also say, Arshak, you were in there from the beginning. We started a deep dive of Aristotle's works. And in parallel of me writing the book, we were going through his rhetoric. So I was steeped in that world of Aristotle's rhetoric. And so I knew it. And I felt like this people need to know that term better because it has a negative connotation. Oh, that's just rhetoric, you know? And in Aristotle's day, that was what the sophists, they would use rhetoric to win arguments. And Aristotle said, no, you have to have moral character. You have to have a logical structure for your argument, and then you need to know where your audience is and where you'd like them to be, which is the ethos, logos, and pathos. That is the three pillars of my methodology here.
Yeah, I mean, we should definitely dig deeper into it. But before that, I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
highlight your choice of the seven speeches of the seven individuals that
Yes.
you
Mm-hmm.
so beautifully organized and arranged in the book to make
Mm-hmm.
your message vivid and alive.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did that come about? I mean, there are thousands of
Yes.
speeches throughout history. There are thousands
There
of
are. Yes.
remarkable individuals that said
Mm-hmm.
something memorable, that
Mm-hmm.
people of any time have recorded it because they, recognize it as important for posterity. And out
Mm-hmm.
of that wide horizon of availability to you, you focused on this seven.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was the process there?
Yes. Who I call the Magnificent Seven, which is a
Right.
tribute to an amazing book, an amazing film, probably a book too, back in the late 1960s, a heroic film. So, Orshak, as I say in the book, Patrick Henry's speech was the first speech I heard, maybe 10, 12 years old in grammar school. And I said, this changes everything. The fact that a person can stand up in front of a crowd and sway them from feeling timid and bowing to the king to making the call, the charge for liberty, that always gripped me. So Patrick Henry had to be on that list. Abraham Lincoln, we know Americans grew up learning the Gettysburg Address, the significance there. So I felt like that's a no brainer as well. Frederick Douglass is not as well known and should be well known. And his self made man speech, he was an amazing presenter. He was a great writer. He was an entrepreneur. And he worked for over the course of decades, fine tuning his self made men speech. And it's also something people should strive for to become self made. And of course, I say in my book, even though he doesn't explicitly say this applies to women as well, we can understand I'm finishing that for him. This applies to women as well. Then we come to the 20th century, and I thought it's important, Arshak, to draw contrast. We know philosophy that we need a contrast. So these first three speakers, they were for the positive. They were upholding liberty. That's the subtitle: Lessons for Liberty's Leaders. And then I wanted to show how persuasive speakers, especially emotion-driven speakers, can win over a crowd as Vladimir Lenin did, as Adolf Hitler did in the early 20th century, and then show that contrast, a voice of reason, who was Winston Churchill. Then we come later, second half of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr. Nobody on the planet has not heard his great speech, which the culmination is the chapter title, content of character over skin color. Imagine, Orshak, if people were as obsessed today with content of character as they are color of skin. What kind of culture we'd be living in? And then we come to personal favorite, Ayn Rand, particularly her West Point speech. Is very special to me in many ways, but the fact that we would have these heroes hikes overlooking West Point, and every time I'd look at that, I would envision her speaking there in front of these cadets. And then also, I needed somebody who was still alive. I wanted someone who was still alive. And because this presentation was in the African continent, I wanted a hometown hero, so to speak. I wanted to find somebody from Africa, and the crowd went wild for Magat Wade, who has an amazing TEDx talk. And her point, similar to Frederick Douglass before her, is that let people work, give them dignity. If you hand them stuff, you diminish their view of themselves and they become utterly dependent. And so she's about having prosperity and the pride that comes with prosperity and the dignity in working for your own and getting the government. I think the way I phrase it is free trade instead of foreign aid, because billions and billions of dollars have gone in. So those are the seven. But let me just say this and then I'll let you jump in. I had to reduce. We know reduction. We don't want to overload. When I gave the talk in Kenya, I had John F. Kennedy. His "We Choose to Go to the Moon" speech, I think, is the greatest example of a single speech leading to an achievement of historic proportions, something men have tried and pondered since the beginning of time. And I think without John F. Kennedy's speech, that would not have happened, at least not in the 1960s. And then even Ronald Reagan gave an amazing speech from California governor when he was running in the 1960s. So I had to delimit. I got face criticism for that. But hey, doesn't mean there's not going to be a part two or some kind of spin-off, but for now, I did not want to overload. I thought I had a good enough sample there. And as I say, they are personally significant to me. So you can choose who resonates with you, and I would understand that. Same principles apply, ethos, logos, pathos. I can find a way to make them integrate using that methodology.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate your personal connection to those speeches, the way you explicate them in the book. And this resonated with me very dearly because you and I started the Hero Hikes as inspiration from our mutual friend and brother, Andrew Bernstein, who wrote The
Yes.
Heart of the Pagan. And the purpose of that hero hikes that you mentioned in passing was to exert ourselves physically in a challenging scramble, and kind of a combination between hike and rock climbing, to a height where we'll feel physically exhausted, but not spiritually deprived, to
Yes.
um, celebrate ourselves and bring our achievements in the community of people that joined us to do that exercise possible. So you've always had that personal connection with the hero worship, with becoming yourself a hero and looking up to heroes. And that resonates. And it also makes the connection between character and persuasion natural, authentic. I mean, you get one sense that I got from reading the book is that I posed the question to myself, which I'm going to pose to you, but I'm going to give you my inkling, is that throughout history, in every epoch of struggle, of tension, there is always a voice emerging from that tension that speaks clearly to the confusion generated from the tension, from the fear generated from the tension. And that voice clears the horizon for everybody else to have a clear vision into the future. And it takes a character of heroic stature to be able to clear the view of the horizon and show the way. It's leadership, right? That's your focus group. You want to focus on the people that are capable of seeing the future past the fog. And the question that arose to me is that how come I don't hear more speeches today when I see a lot of tension. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a lot there. And if I could just go back, Arshak, the one thing your audience might have caught that I went historical. So I went in historical order because this book is just as much a history book, which you kind of won't be taught today. Some of it was what I was taught when I was a kid, but just so it's a history book on top of philosophy, psychology, self development, heroism. And one of my purposes in this book, Arshak, is to give leaders the courage to speak out. So sadly, if I even go to the dedication page to Carrie Ann Biondi, and also those who risk their lives by lifting their voice to promote liberty. Now, two of my Magnificent Seven, were killed for speaking out. If we go back to September, 1 week after the book came out, Charlie Kirk was killed for speaking out. All right. He's right there in my dedication. So it takes a certain degree of courage to be able to do that, to stand up in front of a hostile crowd, which we know Ayn Rand did that every time she went to Ford Hall Forum. There was a hostile crowd and she was ready to take them on. She's not alone. But in this case, it does require this moral character that says, my message is more important than my safety, in effect. I think people need to hear this message. So why don't we hear this? Why don't we hear this enough? I don't know. I think actually, I do think the assassination of Charlie Kirk has had an impact on the boldness of people standing up and speaking out. And I didn't agree with Charlie. Let me just clarify. Like, I just feel like the fact that he chose persuasion, verbal persuasion over violence, and was killed for promoting that. That's my point. Going down to the nitty gritty, I certainly don't agree, entirely. But what he was aiming at, I think we need more of those. And there might have been some. I think there's a correlation there with us not finding that.
Yeah, I think there's a definite connection between communication as integration rather than information transfer.
Yes.
So
Yes.
when you have developed an integrated character that deeply values the integration of your soul with the world and another, you want to
Mhm.
project that. You want to project that integration onto everybody else because you see the value, you feel the value, you live the value. And as a cherished value, as a validated value, you want to have everybody experience that value, experience
Mhm.
exactly the love and integrity of character that you
Mhm.
experience within yourself. And when you do that, you're going to meet resistance, you're going to meet constraint, you're going to meet
Yes.
disagreement. Why? Because people are not going to be integrated as you are. They're going to have a different degree of integration. But I think for me to answer the question that I posed in terms of there's a lot of tension out there and there are not too many voices speaking out is not because of fear. I mean, an integrated man who really cherishes an idea and sees the righteousness of that idea and sees the justice of future um, for that idea to be proclaimed to hold the future viable, um, it's a lack of integration. It's a lack of character. It's a lack of leadership that we haven't, as a society, cultivated in the right form. I mean, Ayn Rand was one of the last greats, right? I mean, I'll bring Andrew Bernstein
Yes.
in our discussion again, but he had a lecture. I remember the
Mhm.
great four of history and philosophy:
Mhm.
Plato,
Mhm.
Aristotle,
Yes.
Kant, and Ayn Rand.
Hmm.
these are um, momentous thinkers that shaped the human
Hmm.
civilization, at least in the West. And so, if they had any deficiency in their conviction, no matter how courageous they may be, they will never be able to speak out on such a level of controversy within the
Hmm.
spectrum of their temporal existence, that nobody would have known about it. But they were so pregnant with these ideas, they could not hold it in. They had to give birth to that and communicate it to the world. And thank goodness they did, because from all four, we've learned a great deal today. So
If I could add
yeah.
one thing, Arshak, hold that train of thought. I agree, totally agree with you. Sadly, we mentioned so much about character as an essential. When you bring up the point that, yeah, we don't have conversations today where we should, this tension. And I think so much of the tension, Arshak, comes from a lack of purpose that people have in their lives. This willingness to give up themselves and join some kind of tribal group, political, religious, whatever you want to attribute it to it. And it's because of this lack of what we know as self-esteem. There's this self-loathing. And so I will only have my identity recognized when I join some group, join some tribe. And that is a primitive level. We've had these periods throughout history. I think a lot of the 1960s, this was one thing Ayn Rand herself was fighting at that time. And I do highlight that in the book. Uh, in passing, I highlight that she was fighting the collectivism. But if we had more people who just simply had more dignity, more pride in who they were, not wanting to live what you mentioned before, I'll just give you an example. Carrie Ann and I, we walk every day together, holding hands, we're smiling, we're in love. People see us on the street and they say, "You two are in love." But to your point, Arshak, I always say the same thing. We want everyone to experience what we have. We don't want to hog up the amount of love in the universe. We want everyone to have that experience. And you were just saying that, not necessarily about love, but it's this sharing of this amazing value, this amazing experience that we're only here for a limited time. So why waste it complaining and bickering and loathing ourselves? So to your point, I think it's, yeah, we want to share this benevolence. That's the term, Rand certainly talked about there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, although your book centers on communication, I think it encompasses all these elements, and some of those elements are explicit through the character of the speeches you
Hmm.
organize, and some of the dynamics are implicit in terms of um, uh, that coherence between identity and expression.
Hmm.
And I love that when you go into logic and emotion, right? You have the logos and the pathos, but you have to
Hmm.
start with the ethos. And
Yes.
so maybe
Yes.
we should just revisit these three, because these are
Hmm.
your bedrock
Hmm.
on which you built
Yes.
your program.
Sure.
So
Hmm.
um, why? I mean, what's the significance of the order ethos, logos, and pathos?
First, let me show here. This is Aristotle's Rhetoric. This copy was from John Lewis.
Oh wow!
His wife Casey gave it to me, and I use this as a reference. And Aristotle's Rhetoric is on persuasion. How do we persuade people? Our whole lives, all day long, in our communication, we tend to be persuading. You just came from a eulogy. You just came from a funeral. someone gets up and gives the eulogy, they are persuading their audience of the value of that person who they are honoring. So we're constantly persuading. And Aristotle, in this case, yes, ethos is the moral character of the speaker, tends to be also known as the credibility. But there is, to me, certainly there's a hierarchy here. First comes the moral character, and the credibility follows from that. And the credibility comes from your experience, from your success, from your battles that you've achieved, all of which help build your moral character. And so, a speaker, if, for instance, someone is up there on stage, I mean, I'll never forget, Bill Clinton used to get paid $100,000 to speak after he said, "I did not have sex with that woman." All right. We all know this man has no moral character, but they're still paying him. We know he's a liar. This is how you look at how a culture declines, and Clinton's not the only one, but that was one for me following the speaking world. That was like a concrete example. And then when I'm reading my book, when I'm writing my book, I'm like, well, who has moral character here? And well, here's an example of not, but people are still swallowing this stuff or paying money for this stuff. So there's a corruption that's happening here that Aristotle, again, he observed it. And that's why he said, no, we need to have these pillars here. So start with the moral character, then give the logos. Logos means argument comes from ancient Greek. And so does point A lead to point B, or does it contradict point B? Is your audience wondering, wait a minute, where's that person go? How do you get that conclusion from these premises? I'm not sure. So the logos should be the logical structure of an argument. It should be, as you said, fully integrated, where it almost seems, the conclusion seems inevitable. Wow, that's a great integration here, starting with this premise and that premise, and then coming with that conclusion. And each of the speakers does that. Each of the Magnificent Seven speakers does that. They have something new that their audience needs to put together for themselves. And then the pathos is the most interesting part, in the sense that we don't like this appeal to emotion is a logical fallacy. It's a logical fallacy, but that is when you are only relying on emotion.
Right.
What Aristotle says is people come to presentations. I'll take you, Arshak. I just want to share your context right now. You just came from a funeral. Somebody 96 years old, life, family history. You're not in an intellectual frame of mind that you would have been had you not done that. Me as a speaker has to recognize that. And then I have to adjust and say, okay, I want my point to come across, but I want Arshak to be with me. I want to bring him from where he was to where I'd like him to be. Is this manipulation? You could say it's manipulation in the sense of bringing someone from here to here, but not if you're using ethos and logos. It is a result. So people have these emotions, and speakers need to recognize that. Now, a flaw is speaker comes up and they have an hour to give a talk, and they're going to get through their talk no matter what's happening out there. They got an hour. And so it's like a brick wall between audience and speaker. That's why I recommend, just as a current stage style of delivery, in the past it was fine to stand at a lectern, but nowadays that tends to be like a barrier. So I don't want anything separating me from my audience. I want them to see my entire body language, which is a form, I'm off camera here, which is a form of communicating, so that they can see, am I seeing, are the words matching the stature of the person? Are they slumping over? That doesn't look like really good moral character. So all these things we're thinking, because as you likely know, Arshak, what people see on stage tends to have more impact than the words that come out of their mouth. But knowing college, I pulled Carrie Ann from the academic world, where just getting up and reading a 3-hour paper was all that was required. And she's come a long way since meeting me. I'll just say that. But she's much more critical. She used to just sit in the front row and just take notes. Didn't matter. Did not matter at all. Pathos was not an aspect
Right.
of an academic conference. And for me, I'm like, no, that's one reason most speeches are forgotten by the next day. And I have the data in the beginning of the book. Because most speeches are forgotten by the next day, we need tips and techniques to become memorable. And so tell stories, engage your audience, integrate ethos, logos, pathos.
Yeah, I find Aristotle's focus on ethos, pathos, and logos
Mm-hmm.
remarkable. Um, but he's the he's the father of logic. At least that's how we see him in
Yes.
history. And it only makes sense that he contemplated about the connection of this, and as you put it in the context of all these sophists that they were
Mm-hmm.
very manipulative,
Mm-hmm.
and they were
Yeah.
trying to get money for their talk.
Yeah. Yes.
And we have plenty of politicians today that, so long as they have
Modern
the
day. Yep.
reputation of being a successful term politician without any impeachment, they'll probably muster
Mm-hmm.
100 grand a talk or more, or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the rate
Yeah.
today is.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I jump in,
yeah.
Arshak? Just one thing on that. Technically, the proper title of the book would be Voices of Rhetoric, which is the broader. See, Voices of Reason focuses, you would think, focuses on the logos side, possibly at the expense of the pathos and ethos. But when I talked to the publishers, they rightly said, no, that sounds like that sounds like a college textbook, which I did not want. And also, as you would can likely imagine, I'm using Ayn Rand's Voice of Reason context. That was the name of my Manhattan cable TV show back in the 1990s. And it is an expression in popular vernacular. But just on your point about the logos and the reason part, a more proper and more accurate title would be Voices of Rhetoric. But it just I had to change that.
Well, I don't want to disagree with you, but I'm going to disagree with you anyway.
You can. Oh yeah, you can. We're having a conversation
All
here.
right. So I think the way you published your title is
Mm-hmm.
um, accurate and appropriate, especially with the articulation of ethos, pathos, and ethos,
Mm-hmm.
logos, and pathos, especially in that order. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because you and I know from Ayn Rand, I mean, Ayn Rand is not a popular philosopher, but she's a popular novelist. But in her
Yes.
philosophy,
Good distinction.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in her philosophy, um, in in her introduction to epistemology, she says that reason is the integration that the mind uh, makes based on the material provided by the senses,
Mm-hmm.
and that articulates through the ethos, logos, and pathos. Your your integration of the material provided by your senses, as you pointed out, when you look at someone, you get much more information than when you listen to someone, right? Because we're mostly in our heads, mostly in our perception.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to devise a whole conceptual framework of consciousness, which she identifies as consciousness is the active process of differentiation and integration. So,
Mm-hmm.
what my mind is doing is constantly differentiating and integrating the material provided from the senses. And here, in the focus of communicating my integrations that may be perceived but not articulated or interpreted in a manner that I wanted to be interpreted. So I have to clarify it to my audience, because I can just show up on the
Mm-hmm.
stage in a brilliant suit and nice haircut, and there'll be nothing there. But
Mm-hmm.
I need to bring the pathos, logos, ethos, so the inverse or reverse order, whichever order I bring it in, it will matter. And so, in that sense, I mean, I can see the tribute to Aristotle to maintain the rhetoric in the title, but reason actually captures more of what you're exactly manifesting in her articulation of the moral is the practical and the practical is the moral.
Thank you, Arshak. I hadn't thought of it that way. So I told the way you phrased that was so clarifying to me that I will never say again in my life that a more accurate title would be voice of rhetoric, because you just refuted that idea. Because reason is more broad than just the logos part. That's your thesis is reason is more broad. Reason integrates the three of those pillars, and I totally agree with you. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for that
and you
clarification.
articulate them so beautifully in the focus of how those. I mean, you cannot just be in your book. You focus on this aspect that just ethos is not enough, just logos is not enough, just
Mhm.
pathos is not enough. You have to have all three of them
Yes.
integrated in a clear voice of
Mhm.
projection. And um, that makes your book, in my view, very powerful and very valuable for anybody who, whether they consider a master of communication or a novice. I think this book will serve uh, both categories well. Um,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yes.
job well
Mhm.
done, and thank you for writing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Arshak. If I could go back to something you mentioned about the hero's hikes, I touch on this in the book. One of my goals, because since you've known me, in 1992, as an example, when Bill Clinton was running for president, I joined Toastmasters International. The year before I won the championship, Dale Carnegie public speaking. So it's been a topic that has fascinated me. Aside from being a hero worshiper of great speakers, it's just been something I've been integrated into my life. And with the heroes hikes, one of my goals was to get others to break out of their shell and to put them in a position where we're not going to laugh at you. And people were in tears. People were I would see them shaking. Some of them I had to cut off because they thought they were taking over the forum, but there was an authenticity where for those 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and just for your audience's sake, what we do, we meet in the spring and in the fall. The fall foliage in Breakneck Ridge was always just absolutely spectacular. And we would talk about our achievements the past 6 months and our goals for the next 6 months. So it was like twice a year. We were working around the clock with a group that wanted us to succeed. There was no, what I talked about earlier, like the self hatred, the self loathing that we see so much. There was this cheerful pride and achievement that made others want to become better, including better speakers. That they, you know what, next time I sat this one out, next time I'm going to get up there and just say something. I don't care if people laugh at me or whatever. And so that was conscious. That was a conscious choice on my part because I feel like the ability to get up and speak in front of a group of people is so powerful to your own psyche, but it turns you into a leader and it can help you in so many ways, particularly in the business world, where we are called on to speak in front of the board, in front of the media. Some disaster happens in front of our team at a turnover shift. And so I wanted to give the attendees, the participants, that opportunity.
So you've had a very eclectic and wide ranging experiences. I mean, you were a corporate guy at Merrill Lynch, you did
Mhm.
things on your own, you had your own communication company, you were doing
Sang in a rock band.
right, right, dancing. And I mean, you've
Yes,
done
ballet dancer.
so many things in so many cultural contexts. So you're a true New Yorker, right? You're a man of the world in that sense. You don't care if,
Thank you.
the guy is Armenian or English or Pakistani. It doesn't matter.
No.
All it matters to you is character. And so, but you were an American guy. You were born and raised in America. And as far as I know, you don't have an extensive living experience abroad. And yet, right, and yet, here you are going to the forgotten continent. You're going to Africa, and you're going to now embrace African characters. So, what was it like for you to be in a different continent, to be in a homogenous culture, so to speak? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of
Hmm.
diversity where you are, but it's much more homogenous than New York, which is your hometown.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and then communicating the same ideas, the same characteristic. How are you received? What kind of impression that exchange made on you?
Hmm. Uh, I was well received, Arshak. Let me set a prior context, which is 2 months earlier, I spoke in Tbilisi, Georgia, on Ayn Rand's heroic characters.
All right.
While they were having, the Russians were making a dent. Okay, so that was summer 2024, and then in Nairobi, armed guards were shooting protesters in the
Man.
streets. So we couldn't leave the compound. We could not leave. And there was a safari across the street, which we went to the day before, with trucks and everything. Arshak, elephants are my favorite animal since I'm like 2 years old. There were elephants. We had to pay to go. The hotel was saying, "Don't leave the premises," and we paid somebody $100 to take us to the place where the elephants were, and then let us come back. And that was a big thrill, absolute big thrill. I'm looking for one photo here. Yeah. So here's just one picture for your audience. If you ask how I was received,
Yeah.
this is me with a bunch of it. Guess what? You can pick me out out of
Yeah.
this
You
crowd.
stand out.
It's pretty homogenous.
Right.
Yeah, I do stand out here. But look at those smiling
Yeah.
faces. Everybody
Very
is
happy people.
smiling.
Yeah.
All right. And I love that. I absolutely love that. So that's an example of how I was received personally because I embraced them. I said, so as much, yeah, Arshak, yes, I'm a proud American, but I've been all over the world and I adapt to wherever I go. I went to China climbing 7,000 steps with Andy's daughter, Penny. No, she didn't do that part with me. I did that on my own. But I wanted to be in a place where nobody looked like me. The writing was different. I see the Chinese symbols above your head. And I did that in southern Spain as well, where it was all in Arabic and everyone was dressed in garb. I don't mind putting myself in these places where I need to be aware. What am I doing? I'm building my character. I can't be the stoic American that's just going to be, staying no matter what. I want to adapt to where I'm going. So I did research on Kenya, on the goal, the purpose of the program, and then my role in that. And so this is one of those things that I felt was, yeah, life changing experience. If I can tell you one story, Arshak. So I had the opening of my speech, and the day before my speech, we went on this safari and we saw lions and we saw alligators and rhinoceroses. But there were two ostriches that did a mating dance.
Why?
Okay. And everybody watched it. All the 100, there were 100 students, by the way. Okay. And everybody watched it. So when it's my turn to speak, I had my opening and I said, you know what? I'm going to tailor it to this audience. I said, yesterday we saw lions. We saw all these aggressive animals, lions and rhinoceroses and alligators, and they were all lounging around. what was the one species where they were pursuing a goal? And the hand goes up, ostriches, you know? So here's what a good speaker does. They find the context. So now everyone in that room knows this is not a canned speech. This is not a speech I just gave in Tbilisi 2 weeks earlier, you know, because I'm letting them know this is, I was there, you were there, and you're part of this opening. And then part of my message was ostriches tend to be known for putting their heads in the sand. And I was going to say, but you here, your goal, you know, your challenge is to get people to take their head out of the sand and promote liberty with a, you know, with a rational foundation. So that was like a part of my goal there. And just one speaking technique is like know the room and find a way to bring them in like from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds exciting. It,
It
it
was.
sounded like you had a lot of fun. And from
I had fun. Carrie Ann, she got all the shots. She had malaria shots and yellow fever. I was like, I'm taking my chances. You know, I don't care. And she was afraid of getting, you know, bit by mosquitoes. And I was like, no, this is cool. We're in a different culture. I'm not drinking the water out
oh,
of the
okay,
tap, but
you're not fully integrated.
yeah, yeah. But actually, the thing I really wanted to do, Arshak, because as you pointed out in the beginning, I love the heat. Nairobi was on my radar since I'm a kid because I look at the globe and it's right on the equator, and I always want to do 1 foot northern, 1 foot southern hemisphere. But I read the reports and they said it's too dangerous. It's not. Don't do it. Don't do it. So they persuaded me not to do it. But yeah,
Next
so
time.
to go to next time. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And now I'm coaching. If I could just say this, Arshak. So there's one group from Burundi. I mentioned Edgard Mugenzi. He has a group in Burundi, Central Africa. English is their third language. It's French, then Kurundi, then English. I gave them a PDF of the book. We are going chapter by chapter. We just did chapter 10 last week. We've gone through each chapter kind of like a workbook because these students are dedicated. There'll be a power outage and they log like right back in. So it's lasting. It's not just a one and done. I've made connections that continue to this day.
Yeah, and I just want to focus on one point here that
Mhm.
these young men and women in Africa have access to the same internet that the young men and women in America have. And they have access to that information in three languages, not only one. And yet, I suspect you don't have as enthusiastic young crowd following you in America the way these African young people embraced you, right?
Sadly.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think this is indicative of what civilization is declining and what civilization may rise.
Mhm.
And the common denominator is that voice of reason, is that when you listen to reason, you build, you integrate, you rise. And when you grow a deaf ear on reason, you decay. Um, Entropy is a very
Just
powerful
one
force.
example,
Yeah.
Arshak, if I could just interject. When was America born? Out of the age of reason and enlightenment. America could not be born today. There is too much irrationality in the culture. There is too much hostility. There is too much envy. Ayn Rand called us living in the age of envy. So America came out of the age of reason by choice, something completely different. Here's where I admire people like you, Arshak. You've known this about me, how I embrace people who come here. I often say, I'll take one Arshak and let me send 50 19-year-old Americans to Bulgaria in exchange any day of the week. All right. The people like you make this a better place, a better country. And this is what I tell to the Africans as well. It's like, boy, you have a future here because you're following the right ideas, and be aware of that.
Yeah, um, every one of us should be. Um, um, but some of us are more enthusiastic about it than others. So, um, and that's exactly the point of ethos, logos, and pathos. I mean, you can
Hmm.
have a good understanding, you can have a good moral character, um, and yet lack the motivation, lack the
Hmm.
conviction that that it's necessary for you to promote your understanding and integrity. But when you look at history, it's never about you. It's always about your past and the future. It's never about the present. And so your act is in the present, but that act is influenced from the past and it motivates the future. It, in our case, um, I'm trying to ensure my future, right? Through whatever I've built in the past, and my act today
Hmm.
is insurance for the future. So integration becomes very important. But if I cannot communicate that integration, then it falls um, short. It falls without an impact,
Hmm.
and that's what you are focusing on to get that, as you put it, to speak with greater courage, conviction, and impact. So it's not enough to have the courage and the conviction, but you have to make an impact. And I remember related to this, again in Andy Bernstein's lecture on the four grades,
Hmm.
he made a point about how influential they are. So it's not enough to be great philosopher, but I mean, in order for you to be great, you really have to have an influence. It's not enough that you have a great idea, but you have to be influential. And all these speeches that you single out in your book um, do exactly that. They influence their current culture in a direction that they see as the right direction to go. So,
Yeah, one concrete Arshak there is when I talk about Patrick Henry's speech, and then I mentioned Feng Shou Zhao, who stood 20 feet from the tanks in Tiananmen Square in 1980 and rewrote in Mandarin the Declaration and the US Constitution and gave it to many students, many of whom were killed. And while doing research for that chapter, I'm watching on CNN and I see in China near Tiananmen a sign that says, "Give me liberty or give me death." So Patrick Henry's words are lasting in a call on the other side of the world centuries later. People, English is not their first language. That's we talk about impact. And I can just clarify in case your audience is wondering, I am not saying all of these speakers are absolutely perfect in all aspects of their lives. I'm just saying, in the context of delivering an impactful speech at a pivotal moment in history, they succeeded, and we are the beneficiaries of their courage to speak out. And that's a big part there. And just one more thing, if I go back to your great Andy Bernstein's four great philosophers, here we need to be clear. Great doesn't mean great means gigantic impact. It's not a moral. It's actually not a moral judgment because two of those four we think were really wrong. Plato and Immanuel Kant were wrong on major issues to which we are suffering consequences today. But what Andy's talking about with his title and what you keep mentioning, the great there, just like Alexander the Great, it just means he did staggering. The scale was massive, the impact was massive. Morally, was the guy great? That remains to be seen, or likely is. So I just wanted to clarify that term, great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Used.
That's a good point, because you can have great influence, but Hitler was very influential. So um, he's a great dictator. So um,
Yeah.
you know, there's but the point remains that um, Hitler was a good communicator, if not a great communicator, right?
Effective.
He
He was
he had
effective.
he had his ethos, he had his logos, he had his pathos, and he was able to ignite his convictions into a whole national psyche, and pretty much everybody brought him up in cult, and um, and so that's the power of an impactful presentation, of an impactful
Hmm.
communication. So you
Hmm.
can, to your point, you can use it for good or evil, but if you want to be impactful communicator, this is what you need to do. And now I'm thinking of something very interesting that is just occurring in my mind, is that evil people don't need motivation. They're already motivated by their
Hmm.
desire, narcissistic desire to
For power, usually.
right,
Hmm.
to dominate, to show their
Hmm.
dominance, to show their
Hmm.
prominence. Where people like Frederick Douglass or
Winston Churchill as a
Winston
contrast.
Churchill, right, exactly, who was very
Hmm.
reluctant to go into the role that he adopted.
Hmm.
But he was continuously um, delivering the same message when everybody neglected him. Um, so a good person will be persistent, but may not be forceful. He would rely on others' capacity to reason, to see the truth. Where an evil person like Hitler or Lenin, they will pound their fist on the desk and say,
Yes.
"This what must be done," and nothing
Hmm.
else. So they don't know how to speak in probability. Everything is absolute for them. Where the good souls, they allow a probability of error, but
Yes.
nonetheless they focus on the conviction of their interpretation or understanding. So I think that's a good distinction to be made.
Yes, and on top of that, one point I make about Hitler, about both of them, Hitler and Lenin, is reasoned debate, reasoned discussion was eliminated in their context. If you try to reason with them, you don't find pictures of Hitler having a civil conversation. You won't find a video of Hitler having a, you just see him pounding, and it was choreographed. His whole thing, he spent hours rehearsing for the maximum emotional effect. And so that's your point. If we come back to reason now and voices of reason, that was not Hitler. They were outlawing reason. And of course, Leonard Peikoff's Ominous Parallels book really goes into detail there about how irrational both of those cultures were. He doesn't talk about Lenin so much, but it's the same. It's pretty much the same
Yeah.
point. There is that reason is out. It's pure blind emotion with this force, as you say, uh, and this dominance that Sadly, people who are not self assured, don't have high self esteem, looking to follow, looking to join a tribe, they're attracted to that.
Yeah.
Hence the effectiveness.
Yeah. It is effective. And I mean, our whole structure, educational structure, social structure, the relationship between institutions and functions in society, the way societal institutions interact with the individual from the get-go points to this openness to a dictator to come in and influence their orientation. We forgot um, to educate independent thinkers. We want every student today to be dependent on some kind of content and forget about the method by which that content was identified. So it's everything is by design today. I mean, uh, what I find staggering um, and thank goodness it's happening is that I mean we both live in America, so in America the political life is two-faced, and you have a pretty much 50-50 participation in either of the faces. So that's not ideal, but it's good because I get 4 years of one and then I get 4 years of another. And so it depends on whoever, has more tolerance for the other for material. And sometimes I get 8 years of some one and then go into
Yeah.
4 or 8 years of the other. And neither one of them is ideal, but it makes life predictable in a way and safe in a way that these guys are not going to eat each other out. They're not going to go into cannibalism, and they have enough behind them to support them. But again, that support is by design. It's not authentic, I don't think. And sooner or later, that will have to change in order for this society to progress.
Hmm. Yeah, if I could jump in, Arshak, what you said earlier, not this last point, reminds me, I go to Ayn Rand and the Fountainhead. Who was the most effective speaker in the Fountainhead? Certainly in the first three quarters of the novel, you hear his voice, Ellsworth Toohey.
But
When
yeah.
when people hear him, Peter Keating and Katie, everyone just forgets life because it's that voice. She goes into detail about the impact of his voice. Well, what does Toohey say? He says, when he's in grade school, you didn't use the term sacrifice, but that is certainly something that is being pushed on us from every corner. Both political parties sacrifice your life, sacrifice this. And Toohey says, age 12 or 13, well, if everything is sacrifice, shouldn't there be a collector of those sacrifices? Hence your dictator that you're that you're talking about. And the teacher's like angry because he just made a connection. That Chewie just made a connection that the teacher does not want to go down that road. That's the logical end point. But Chewie's perceptive in that. I mean, talk about great. Talk about the greatest villain in world literature. It is Ellsworth Toohey. And part of that is his speaking ability.
Yeah. Yeah. He's
Mm-hmm.
very eloquent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I think
Can I show? Actually, let's just stay in the Fountainhead, Arshak. Let me, whatever you're thinking, because I often say this as a contrast, because the hero, spoiler alert, the hero in the Fountainhead is Howard Rourke, and twice he's on trial. And the first time, he only goes logos. He just thinks, I'm going to show my pictures, and that's enough. And he loses. The second time, he looks at the moral character of the jury. Rand does this on purpose. He picks the toughest faces, okay? And then he gives this amazing speech, page 679, and all of my Fountainhead books, I know it by heart, and uses the ethos, logos, and pathos in his speech,
Right.
and then he wins.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, he's not an effective speaker because he's more about, hey, if my work doesn't persuade them, nothing I can say will. That's why he loses the Manhattan Bank and some of these other commissions. But Rand is not doing this. She's not like consciously saying, "Oh, I'm going to analyze his speaking the speaking prowess of Ellsworth Toohey and compared to Howard Rourke." But for me, as a speaker, I love these kinds of things. I can see the effectiveness of each. And when Rourke at the end uses ethos, logos, pathos, boom, he wins.
Right. But I mean, it's important to point out that the jury he picked was in disagreement with the advice he received. Right. The advice
Yes.
was get meek audience for your
Yes.
speech, and he
Yes.
said, no, I want the mathemaicians, I want the engineers, I want the
construction workers.
thinkers, and the
Yeah.
exactly, men of character. And so again, there is a point at which, no matter how brilliant you may be, you'll be denied an audience, right? I mean, it takes a reason, and that's why I believe that Voices of Reason is the proper title for your book, because you speak to reason, right? You wanna engage reason. You don't really want
You
to.
appeal to reason.
Right,
You appeal to the
right,
audience's
right,
reason.
and let reality be the judge. Let logic dictates the terms. And so in that way, life is good. Life is easy, actually, because you are relying on your natural processes of differentiation and integration. It's not automatic, but as long as you are willing to focus on that, you achieve it. And then once you develop the passion for it, it will naturally bring the content, with animation, with fervor, with the pathos, that an impact requires. And so, given all that to an audience that it's capable of um, analyzing it in a rational way, then it's the impact is joy, right? Just in the same way that you were talking about when you go outside with your loved one and you hold hands and people notice that, and that's all three silently communicated, right? It's a physical communication that we all understand at a glance. And I think with all the exercises you have in the book, I think you're preparing people to get this through practice, and you have many ingenious ways of suggesting how to practice, and um, how to
Thank you.
harness that ability to communicate on whatever it is that you are communicating. Um, so, it's, if you compile all this advice and structure that you provide, I think a person can bring that skill to a perceptual level where they don't have to think and analyze and hesitate about the process, but rather just let their um, knowledge and character and mood about the motivation why they're doing this shine through. So it's
Yes.
it's a great book, and I want to thank you one more time for writing it. And
Thank you. If I could end on joy, if it sounds like we're wrapping up at least this portion here. So the ultimate goal is more than joy. It's what Aristotle called eudaimonia, which is flourishing. And I want a flourishing society. We want a flourishing society. That's one of the goals of the one and the many, is to reach enough people to have enough impact where they change their sense of life to one that's not having joy and flourishing as an end point, towards consciously going down that direction. So what you just said in wrapping up this aspect of joy, yeah, we want that and more and more. And the more part is this flourishing, this eudaimonia. That's an ultimate goal there.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And um, when you get to a state of that practice, exactly, exactly, that's what's going to happen the way you see it. From joy, you're going to go to the higher order, to the elevated spirit. So um, I know that you may be willing to come back and do some more of
Yes.
this. And I think now that we kind of touched with
Mm-hmm.
broad strokes on um,
Yes.
the entirety of the project, I think it will be
Mm-hmm.
just that we go into some detail on particular aspects of this um, process, basically. And I think that will be helpful for anybody who wants to speak.
Yes.
So, and I have a ulterior motive here because I need to learn how to speak. So that will be very beneficial for me. So I'm grateful that you're willing to do that.
Yes, we can all improve. I'll just say that. But the first step is knowing that I should be better. I
Yeah.
actually should be better. And so that's, I pay just so you know, I pay thousands of dollars a year to be coached by people who are up in, who are my mentors as coaches. So I think, I often say Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, the peak athletes have several coaches. So in that sense, anyone who's looking to improve can benefit from
All I can say is that I hope you make millions by
me
the
too.
people paying you to coach them, um, because
Yes.
their money will be well worth it. So, so I'm
Great.
gonna just say that this to be continued. Right now, we don't have a definite schedule, but
Hmm.
we'll
Hmm.
coordinate our schedules, and we'll
Yes.
meet again with a more focused discussion on the process. And so, again, thank you so much for joining me. And I had fun.
Thank you, Arshak. And thank you for your audience for listening, because as we've emphasized, anybody can benefit from these principles of effective communication. So yeah, thank you again. Looking forward to round two.
Great. Thank you. Have a great day.